It only took about 10 seconds for everything to go wrong. 10 seconds from a normal walk to my car to realizing I was being treated like I didn't belong in a place I had worked for over a decade. I was still in my judicial robes, still mentally replaying arguments from the morning's hearing when a voice cut through the air behind me, sharp and loud. "Hey, stop right there." And yeah, that happened right outside the courthouse where I'd sworn to uphold the law. At first, I didn't even turn around. You know how it is when you're tired after a long day, your brain's still half stuck in work mode. But then the tone hit me. Not curious, not polite, commanding, suspicious. I turned and saw the officer walking toward me, hand resting near his belt, eyes locked on me like I'd already done something wrong. He didn't ask how my day was. He didn't ask if I needed help. He asked who I was and why I was there, outside the courthouse, in broad daylight, while I was wearing a judge's robe. I said my name. I said I was a judge. I said I was leaving work and heading to my car. Calm, professional, the way I've spoken to defendants, attorneys, victims, juries for years. He didn't flinch, didn't apologize, didn't step back. He asked for my ID. I handed him my judicial identification, the same card I'd used hundreds of times before. He barely looked at it, said it looked suspicious, asked for another one. That's when the feeling settled in that heavy, familiar feeling black professionals know too well. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't procedure. This was a test. How far can I push you? How small will you make yourself to keep this from getting worse? I reached for my phone. Not dramatically, not angrily, just slowly, deliberately. I said I was recording. The shift in him was instant, like a switch flipped. His face tightened. His voice rose. He told me to turn it off. Said recording police was illegal. I told him calmly because I knew the law backward and forward that it wasn't. Public sidewalk, public official, constitutional protection, you know what I mean. These weren't opinions, these were settled facts. That's when the hostility showed itself fully. He stepped closer, too close. Close enough that I could smell his cologne, feel the heat off his vest. He told me I was being disrespectful. That word again, disrespectful. Not dangerous, not criminal, just disrespectful. Then he grabbed my phone, and something in me hardened. I said clearly out loud for the record that he did not have my consent to touch me, that he was committing battery. I wasn't yelling, I wasn't threatening, I was documenting. That's the thing people don't always understand. When you know the system, you know that calm documentation is power. By then, people had started to stop. Courthouse staff, attorneys. Someone else raised their phone. I kept talking, narrating everything. Time, location, conduct. My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed steady. He told me I wasn't free to leave. When I asked if I was under arrest, he said no. When I asked what crime he suspected me of committing, he couldn't answer. He rambled about suspicious behavior, about verifying identities. I told him still calmly that detaining someone without reasonable suspicion was unlawful. I asked him to articulate that suspicion on camera. That's where things started to unravel. You could see it in his eyes. He didn't have a reason. He had ego. And now that ego was being challenged in public. Other judges came outside, colleagues, people who knew me, who recognized exactly what was happening. They identified themselves. They told him who I was. Instead of backing down, he snapped at them too, told them to move along or face arrest. At that point, the situation crossed from disturbing to surreal. Backup was called. More officers arrived. A senior sergeant showed up and immediately looked like someone realizing he'd just walked into a nightmare. He tried to talk the officer down, tried to de-escalate, suggested letting me go. The officer refused, said I needed to be taught a lesson. That's when I made a decision. If this was going to happen, it was going to be fully documented. I asked for his badge number. He refused. I asked what statute I was violating. He couldn't name one. I asked about his training regarding citizens' rights to record police. He said recording was always illegal, which told me everything I needed to know. Every answer he gave was worse than silence. Every word dug the hole deeper. Then he said it. You're under arrest. Disorderly conduct. Obstruction. Resisting. I remember the sound the crowd made, that low murmur of disbelief. I said clearly that I was not resisting and would comply, but that the arrest was unlawful and without probable cause. As the handcuffs went on, I kept narrating, calm, precise. Inside, though, I felt something crack. Not fear, something colder. The realization of how fragile dignity can be when someone with a badge decides you don't deserve it. They put me in the back of the patrol car, outside the courthouse where I'd worked for years. I kept recording until they took the phone. The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. a judge being arrested for knowing the law. The video spread fast, faster than anyone could contain it. By that night, it was everywhere. People were angry, people were arguing, people were saying, if this can happen to her, what chance does anyone else have? I spent 8 hours in jail, long enough to feel the weight of it, long enough to think about the people I'd sentenced, the people I'd released, the lives I'd seen pass through that system. When I was released, I didn't go home. I went straight to a civil rights attorney. Because this wasn't just about me, it never was. What came out during the lawsuit was worse than I expected. 17 prior complaints against that officer, 17, all from black professionals, all dismissed internally. Text messages surfaced, racist jokes, discussions about targeting people who thought they were better, training records showed outdated, unconstitutional practices. This wasn't a rogue incident, this was a culture. The city tried to settle quietly, offered money early. I said no, because money without change is just hush money. Federal investigators stepped in, protests erupted, businesses pulled out, insurance companies panicked, pressure mounted from every direction. In the end, the city paid $16 million. More importantly, they agreed to reforms. Officers were fired. Leadership resigned. Federal oversight was imposed. The officer lost his badge, his pension, and eventually his freedom. I went back to the bench months later, same courtroom, same robe. But the weight of that day never really leaves you. And here's the part people argue about. Should it have taken all of this? Should knowing the law be a requirement for surviving an encounter with police? What about the people who don't have that knowledge, or the cameras, or the witnesses? So that's my question for you. Was this justice or just damage control? Was this one bad officer or a system that only changes when it gets caught? And have you ever seen power abused like this and just accepted it because fighting back felt impossible? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear them.